Hey everybody, Doug Passon coming to you from Studio 3553 in Scottsdale, Arizona. Autism Speaks, this great organization, if you go to their website on their justice page, they're going to talk about why autism is relevant to every aspect of a criminal proceeding. And I was glad to see that there because it is relevant to every stage of the criminal proceeding. And I've been talking about this on other podcasts, and I'm going to keep talking about it because the real problem is when it comes to autism, the criminal system is still woefully behind in understanding what autism is and why it matters so much. It matters to culpability, it matters to mitigation, it matters to incarceration, it matters at every level of the system. And we need to better understand this. So, like I said, we've done other podcasts on this, and I'm super excited to say that I've had a person with autism on the podcast to talk about it from firsthand experience. So I am so excited that that person is an extraordinary individual by the name of Nick Dubin. Over 1 million Americans face sentencing every year, and it will be the most important day of their lives. But we don't fully understand the system, how broken it is, and what we can do to make it better. I'm Doug Passon. I'm a 25-year criminal defense lawyer and a sentencing expert. My goal is to bring more awareness, more fairness, and more humanity to the sentencing process. So, are you ready? Then let's get set for sentencing. Hi, Nick. Welcome to Set for Sentencing.
Hey, Doug, thank you very much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here, and I have to tell people about you. So there's a huge bio, and I'm going to hit the highlights. But Nick Dubin is actually a doctor. Nick Dubin, PsyD, right? He's an autism advocate. He's an author. He's an educator. He's a speaker. And he was diagnosed with autism in 2004. He's published so many things, including authoring several books, including the book Autism Spectrum Disorders, Developmental Disabilities in the Criminal Justice System, the Autism Spectrum and Depression, Asperger's Syndrome and Anxiety, A Guide to Successful Stress Management, Asperger's Syndrome and Bullying, Strategies and Solutions, and the Autism Spectrum, Sexuality and the Law, the latter co-authored with Dr. Isabel Analt and
Yep.
Dr. Tony Atwood. What's amazing about Dr. Dubin is, like I said, he brings not just the scholarly expertise to the subject matter, but his personal experience. So he has been a passionate advocate for systemic change. And one of the reasons, besides having autism, is that he himself has been involved in the criminal system. Nick, your bio is I feel like it's very aspirational and hopeful in one sense that when I read it, you continually refer to it as the criminal justice system. And that's how I've referred to it and for so many of my many years of practice. But since I've really started dealing so deeply in the world of autism and in the criminal conduct, I found myself taking the justice part out when I say, and I just say the criminal system, because I just feel like there is a more often than not, we're getting it so wrong. There's just a massive missing piece that is the justice piece in our system. So I guess your job might be to give me some hope and have me, want to put that word, that J word back in when I talk about it, but I'm not sure if I'm there yet. So we're going to talk about all of that and more today. So let's just dig in. Where do we start? I mean, I feel like I'm a story guy and I'd love to hear your what we would call your origin story if this were a superhero movie.
Well, I can definitely start with that. I was born in the late 70s, so autism was not on the radar of everybody at that time. If I was growing up today and you looked at me at 3 years old, you would say, "Hey, that kid is on the spectrum. There's no question about it." But I think back then it was 1 in 10,000 kids were diagnosed, and now it's 1 in 33. So obviously the diagnostic criteria has expanded, and I would have been included. But at 3 years old, I was nonverbal. I was flapping my hands, jumping up and down. I had echolalia, which means I was repeating everything that people were saying. So the only speech I really had was being able to repeat what others said. I didn't have any speech of my own. My parents were very concerned, and my mom was like, "This kid needs speech therapy." And she got me in 5 times a week, 5 times a week speech therapy, occupational therapy. At around 4 or 5, the speech caught up, but a lot of the occupational therapy still didn't help. I mean, I had fine motor issues, gross motor issues, and issues in socializing. So I was placed in special education basically from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. Had a bunch of labels thrown out at me, learning disability, nonverbal learning disability, dyspraxia, dysgraphia, ADD. They gave me Ritalin, but it didn't help because of the ADD was secondary to the autism. And really, I went through the system not being diagnosed because Asperger's didn't come into the DSM until 1994. And before that, it was PDD-NOS. And people just didn't think to see that here's this kid who's isolated, who, you know, doesn't have any friends, who has special interests. I mean, I fit the criteria to a T, and people just didn't think to put me in the autism category because it just wasn't something that was in the cultural milieu at the time. So, yes, I did receive special ed services and have IEPs and all that, but I didn't get the targeted therapy and education that I think I should have gotten because I grew up in a different era.
What kind of therapy, targeted therapy, do you think you might have gotten now that you didn't get then? And how would that have helped you along the way?
I'm sure I would have been put into like a friendship circle kind of group. I'm sure I would have been exposed to other people on the spectrum and would have been exposed to the strengths and weaknesses that people on the spectrum have so that I could assess myself and see that, hey, autism can be a superpower at times, but it also, carries its set of challenges that you really have to advocate for yourself in life. And see, I didn't learn any of that growing up. I just kind of thought I'm different and I'm weird and why is that? And they say I need special ed, but I really don't know why. And it was all just kind of vague and amorphous and didn't make a lot of sense. So, I mean, I think having me exposed to, other people like myself, A, might have given me more friendships, and B, might have, helped me feel like I wasn't so different and abnormal, which I grew up feeling about myself, mainly because I didn't know why. Like, why do I need special ed? Why is school such a struggle? Why am I being bullied all the time? And like, what is it about me that makes me a target to all these bullies? Like, I really didn't know, and nobody else knew. So
Uh,
I think just having that understanding would have been helpful, very helpful.
I'm already gonna start crying over this because I think I mentioned to you, but I have some personal experience in my own life, in my own family, with my own son who's on the spectrum. And what you're describing is what I think it was Leo Kanner who said this is a condition of profound isolation. That and as a child growing up, how isolated and different and weird and ostracized and bullied you felt going through this. And I view that through the lens of my own son's experience and the idea that nobody got him, and he was viewed as a disciplinary problem when he was having meltdowns because of whatever in school, and would lash out by throwing little stones or something, or running off of campus because he couldn't cope, things like that. And you know principals saying I have to give him suspensions and document, like, no, nobody understood. And this is 2000, by the way. This is 2000, and he's born in early 2000. So by the time he's in school age, this is like 2008, 2010, and people still had their proverbial heads up their ass. But I'm just wondering, could you put, because I think this sets the stage for a lot of things to come in your teenage years and young adult years. So could you just put us in the moment of that young boy on the autism spectrum at school in terms of the way that people really dealt with you in terms of kids or teachers?
Yeah, I mean,
How did that feel?
teachers didn't understand me at all. I mean, in first grade, it was my first year in general kindergarten. I was in a special ed classroom. In first grade, I was in a general ed classroom, and then they had LRC time for me. So I was taken out of the class and put in LRC. But my first grade teacher, one day there was a bee that came in the classroom, and I started freaking out. I started running away from it, and I think I had a meltdown. And the teacher called my mom and said, I don't think I can handle this kid. I think he really needs to be in an EI classroom. If you know what EI means, it means emotionally impaired. And so my mom said, that's unacceptable. I want my kid to get the same, free and appropriate education that everybody else is having. And you're not going to kick my kid out because he's scared of a bee. And yeah, I mean, I had challenges all throughout school as far as how teachers responded to me. There was one instance where I remember I couldn't open the door of a classroom because you had to turn it to the left instead of turning it to the right. And it just didn't occur to me in my rigid thinking that there was more than one way to open the door. Like I just thought you always turn it to the right, you never turn it to the left. And the teacher got ripped. She said, I know that you know how to open a door. You're 8 years old. Don't tell me you don't know how to open it. She just wouldn't open it for me or tell me, like, no, you got to turn it to the left. She was like testing me, like, like I was trying to mess with her or something by not opening the door. So, I mean, there was just a lot of that kind of stuff. I had dysgraphia, so I had a hard time with my handwriting. And no matter how hard the teachers worked with me to like grip my pencil in the right way and, write my thoughts the way I should, it just wasn't happening. And therefore, that interfered with my ability to do homework because most homework back then, there were no computers and there was no facilitated communication. And so everything I had to do was cursive. And that was really, really hard for me. So yeah. And that's just the teacher side of it. I mean, I was bullied a lot and picked on because I was different and because I had weird special interests and kids, thought that, this is an easy target and somebody who, is easy to make fun of. And so I don't have great memories of school, and especially middle school, I think was the toughest period.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I hate these stories. They kill me. What were some of your what you say weird special interests? What were you into as a kid?
I was like really, really into game shows. So I would like
Really?
watch, The Price is Right or, shows that were on back then. And then I would kind of script them out so that I'd be saying, what the host would say out loud. And that sounded weird. I mean, kids would hear that, I'm talking like Bob Barker, and the kids would say, what is he talking about? And then I got to a point where like I wanted to be a game show host. So I'd have like money in my pocket and I'd get two kids and I'd say, okay, whoever hits the table first, like hits the buzzer and answers this trivia question, I'll give you $1. So what were they doing? They were taking advantage of me because yeah, they'd play along and sure, it'd be fun for me because I got to act like a game show host, but they were really taking my money,
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't, and only years later did I really see what was happening. I had no clue at the time that this was happening. And a counselor, I think, saw this and came up to me and said, "Do you realize that they're taking your money and you're just letting them?" And I said, "But I want to. This is a game that we're all playing." And she's like, "No, no, no. This is your money. You're supposed to spend this for lunch and for your stuff. You're not just supposed to give it away to people who aren't giving you anything in return." And I didn't get it at the time when she told me that. But
Well, it's a good jumping off point to get a little, I guess, clinical or technical, but I think what you're talking about in that instance is what we would call theory of mind, the ability to intuit the intentions of others. And I hear this all the time. I thought they were laughing with me, and then I eventually figured out they were laughing at me. They weren't able to understand the social implications of what was happening in that moment. And I was just wondering if you could kind of put that in context of, is that a pervasive symptom or a common symptom of autism as opposed to just being unique to you?
no, I mean, I think that autistic people sometimes have that issue. I think sometimes they feel hyper attuned to people. So I think there's a spectrum, but I also think there are instances, a lot of instances where, yeah, common cultural understanding just fails. And I know that's true for me. I like to think I'm an empathetic person, but sometimes that empathy kicks in after the fact. Like after something happens, I can see, oh, that's how I should have reacted, or oh, that's how I should have thought about something. In the moment when there's all the pressures of the moment and I'm having trouble with my executive functioning and, seeing the whole picture, it gets lost on me. But after the fact, I'm like, oh my God, did I really miss that? Like, holy,
Yeah, yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and we'll get deeper into the criminal part of this later, but that is such a common pitfall of people who find themselves running afoul of the criminal system because they're involved in something where they simply did not understand the full implications of what was happening in the moment. I see this a lot in even in fraud type cases. I see, where somebody's taking advantage of someone on the spectrum and they get themselves into huge trouble and they did not see the signs that neurotypicals almost certainly would have. So, there's that. And then there's this other thing that I need to point out is that don't let it go, let's not gloss over the fact that you're describing a process where you do have empathy, and when you miss it, you realize you miss it, and you're working in your own head to figure out where things went wrong so you could do better next time. And that is not just important for you and your life and your process. It's important for the people who get autism so wrong, because there's this myth out there that autistic people do not have the capacity for empathy. And it's so often confused for diagnosis of being a sociopath or psychopath. I always confuse those two. But the fact that you cared enough to go back in your head and say, I really should have done better here. There's not a sociopath on the planet that would go through those machinations in their own mind. And people need to understand that that is the truth about autism, that extremely empathetic people. And if they can't do it intuitively, they can learn it in most cases, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, so we did early school. Things don't get better, I imagine, as you move into adolescence. Adolescence is hard for anyone, but tell me about your experience.
Well, I mean, going from one classroom in an elementary school to seven classrooms per day, having 4 minutes to change books at the locker. My locker looked like a mess. Things were just falling out every time you opened it. I would often arrive to class like a minute late, and that bothers me because I can't stand being late. It's part of my autism. I need to get there on time, but yet I would have to change books, and the disorganization was really prevalent. As far as socializing, yeah, that was when the bullying was at the worst. And that's also the period of time when one's, hormones kind of come online. And I experienced a lot of sexual confusion as far as my sexual orientation. I wanted to be heterosexual. I was looking around and, seventh, eighth grade, that's around the time when people start to date and have casual, sexual encounters. And I could see that, I just didn't know where I fit in there, and it was making me feel, like I was really weird. So here you have this autism that's going undiscovered or undiagnosed, and then you have these hormones that are coming online, and you don't know what the heck's going on there, and you're getting bullied. And academically, I wasn't doing very well because when you go home after being bullied all day, you really don't have that much energy to crack open the textbooks and do homework. I mean, I was just like drained and felt like I needed to kind of recharge my battery. I will say though, around that time is when I started getting interested in becoming a tennis player. And that was the one skill that I had that I kind of took advantage of and that I was good at, where I kind of put all my energy into because I wanted to be recognized and I wanted to be liked and I wanted people to say, hey, he's good at something. He's not just this nerd who, we can make fun of. So instead of putting my energy into academics, I kind of channeled it all into this goal of becoming a really good tennis player.
Well, was there anything in particular about your autism that helped you be a great tennis player?
You know, I don't know. From a physical standpoint, I'm not sure. From a mental standpoint, it's possible. I mean, in tennis, you have to spot patterns, kind of like one does in chess or anything along those lines, any kind of strategic game. And I think it did help me because I used to record tennis matches off the air, and I would have VHS recordings and I would replay them over and over again. And then when I would get on the court, I would kind of try to think to myself, okay, this is what this player did in that situation, so I'm going to try to replicate it and do the same thing. I'm pretty sure the other tennis players who were my age weren't going home and watching VHS recordings and replaying them. I think that was probably something related to my autism. And so I think that helped actually. Yeah.
I was wondering if being successful at tennis helped with the social aspects of high school.
Yeah, I would say in some ways it did, in some ways it didn't. I did play varsity tennis and I played number one singles on my high school team. So in that essence, it did help out. But where it really didn't help out is it's not like I was socializing a lot with the teammates after practice. Like they weren't inviting me over to their homes and like I wasn't going out with them to drink on Saturday nights or to go to a party or anything like that. I was still pretty isolated. And the way I'd kind of like to compare it is it'd be like if the captain of the football team was this loner who didn't have many friends. You would kind of say, "What's with this guy? You know, he's the best player on the team or, you know, the MVP or whatever, but he doesn't have any friends." So it was kind of strange for me to kind of be the number one singles player, and yet I still wasn't friends with the people on my team. And it's not that I didn't want to be, it's not like I was unfriendly to them. I mean, I wanted their approval. That's why I wanted to play number one singles. I wanted to be liked. And it just wasn't happening. It wasn't happening.
Talk to me about anxiety and depression. It's such a common thing among folks on the spectrum, especially around that age. That's your experience, yes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think at that age, my anxiety was off the charts. I was nervous that I would get progress notes, that my parents would come down on me for, you know, not getting good enough grades because I went to a high school that was college bound. Everybody, you know, was going to, you know, very good colleges, some Ivy League schools. And I was on a course where, you know, if I got into community college, I would be lucky because my grades were not that good. I was nervous that, you know, I wasn't managing my time well, that I wasn't getting invited to parties, that if I was invited to an occasional bar mitzvah, I didn't want to go. I would be nervous. I wouldn't know how to handle it. I wouldn't know what to do at the bar mitzvah party. What do I say? How long do I stay? When is it okay to leave? Like these were all things that were never taught to me. These were like social customs. And I didn't have a rule book or a playbook. So the few situations where was invited to something or I did have to do something social, there was a lot of resistance on my part. I didn't want to do it, or if I had to do it, I was very nervous about it. There's a lot of social anxiety around that time. The depression really was there in the background, and I think it kicked in. Probably in my young adult years and has been present ever since. But I think I was depressed in high school, but I probably wouldn't have described it as clinical depression at the time. But looking back, I think I can say it was depression.
I feel like all of this is sort of building because we talk about isolation, depression, questioning your place in the social world and also in the sexual identity in that space. And I kind of feel like your story might be a little different because you're a little bit older. I'm an early seven. I was born in 70. You're born in late 70s. I know that when I was coming up, computers were not really ubiquitous. I think I got my first computer when I was 13, but it was a TI 99 and with DOS. Like there was no internet. There was no opportunity for all of the trouble that we're seeing young people getting into living their lives online. But what we're leading to, and what I know you're comfortable speaking about, is the fact that you found yourself in trouble from conduct online. But I feel like there's a leap in the timeline we have to make a progression. So I guess I would just ask you, keep going with the story, and how do we get from point A to point B being the worst, the worst moments of your life, I would imagine.
Well, I mean, I could talk about what happened after high school, which is going to college. I went away to a school, Grand Valley State University, which is outside of Grand Rapids, Michigan. Was not ready to leave home, but I left under the, kind of in my mind, I had pressure myself that I had to go away because I looked at everybody who was at my school and everybody was going away to school. You were kind of looked upon as a loser if you stayed home and went to your community college. So I went to a school outside of Grand Rapids, about 150 miles from where I lived. Couldn't handle it. Went to the dorm, couldn't handle the noise, couldn't handle, my roommate coming in at, he'd come in at 1 a.m. and then he'd leave and then he'd come in at 3 a.m. And so 3 weeks into my freshman year, I was like, Dad, I'm going to drop. I just can't handle it. I'm ready to drop out. And he's like, no, don't do that. We'll figure something out. We'll just, I'm going to be a problem solver here and we're going to figure something out. So he looked around the area and came upon a rooming house where this nice Christian lady, had a real quiet house that was like a mile or two outside of campus. She rented out her basement for, however much per month or whatever. And that was an alternative I was willing to live with. And so I had this basement space that, pretty much I had to myself. The family lived above me, and I kind of came and go as I pleased and didn't have all the sensory bombardments of the dorm and a roommate. And, for most people, that wouldn't be a very fun college existence, living with a family you don't even know and not having a roommate or anything. For me, that was a way to get through the year, and only just because I came home every weekend. Other than the weekends that I was playing college tennis, which were just a few weekends where we had away matches, I drove 300 miles every weekend, 150 miles each way. Didn't matter what the weather was. It could be 12 inches of snow. You know what Michigan winters are like. And I would
Yeah.
still drive home because I just was not ready. And I didn't have the foresight in my mind to tell myself, hey, you're not ready to do this. And it's okay. Like, you're not a loser if you don't go away. Where do you even get that idea? But it was like, no, I have to go away. And that was the consequence. I mean, it was a self-imposed consequence, but I just wasn't ready to do it.
Mm. That resonates too with my own story. I'm because it sounds like, I've met your dad, and I know in my heart of hearts they're loving and they want everything good for you, and that's I would like to think how I feel about my own son. But parents screw up sometimes because we just have expectations about the way things are supposed to be, and especially if you don't know at the time what the issues are, and if you feel like it's your job as a parent to give them a little nudge and keep pushing them to do this, that, and the other. And sometimes the lesson is, as a parent of an autistic child, that I learned is that, you got to let go of some of the expectations and readjust. And it sounds like your parents were trying to do that with finding you a place to live and everything else. But, this is this is important because a lot of my cases are not only is there no diagnosis, so nobody's fully understanding, what's happening, but there's no support either. It's a lot of low income or socioeconomic background, or for people of color, minorities and low income. There's no services even now. Lack of services. There's a neglect. But your story is clearly not that story. Your story is one of two really brilliant parents, deeply involved, highly educated, doing everything in their power that they know how to do to give you the support that you need with the information they have at the time. But that things still went wrong for you. And I think that's important to know. The point is, even the parents who are deeply involved, deeply knowledgeable, they have to realize that nothing makes sense in autism cases in the criminal system except in the light of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Our autistic young people are vulnerable in every sense of the word. And mostly I think they're vulnerable to being victims of a crime, but they are also vulnerable to running afoul of the law and oftentimes unwittingly.
Mhm.
And speak to me now. Does that resonate with you, this idea of vulnerability in the story of how you got in trouble?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, just statistically, if you expand upon it, from a sociological point of view, people on the spectrum are 7 times more likely to be in trouble with law enforcement, but yet they're also much more likely to be the victims of a crime than to be the perpetrator. So that always struck me as a kind of a catch-22. How can you have people who are more likely to abide by the law be in trouble or get noticed by law enforcement and also be not be the perpetrator of the crime? And yeah, I think there are huge vulnerabilities. I certainly had them. I probably wouldn't have wanted to admit my vulnerabilities beforehand because of pride. Hey, I'm independent, I'm self-sufficient, I'm on the spectrum, and I can take care of myself. I don't have vulnerabilities because I don't want somebody, telling me how I need to spend my money. Like that's, I think, the attitude a lot of autistic people have. And I think it's an attitude I understand because
Yeah.
there's a history of institutionalization and putting autistic people, into institutions because they
Yeah.
were determined to not be able to take care of themselves. So a lot of autistic people carry this armor around them which says, I can do everything. I may have differences, but I can still, get by with accommodations. And the fact is, they may be overlooking some vulnerabilities that they have. And
Yeah.
that was certainly true for me. I didn't want to admit whatever vulnerabilities I had beforehand because
Yeah.
I wanted to be viewed as somebody just like everyone else. Even if it meant being on the spectrum, I still wanted to be just like everybody else. And I wanted to be viewed just like everybody else.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. And in some of the podcasts that I've done, many of the episodes are sort of viewing people who got in trouble and saying maybe there's an autism story here and maybe this helps not excuse what happened, but give context to it. I'm thinking about the Sam Bankman-Fried case. I'm talking about the Elizabeth Holmes case. So the list goes on. But when you read the comments on the YouTube page, a lot of them from the autistic community, they're not happy that I'm talking about autism in the context of criminal conduct because for a lot of the reasons I think you just said. And, I always want to make clear nobody's saying that autistic people are prone to commit crimes. It's actually quite the opposite. Autistic people are by and large, and I don't like to generalize, but I think this is a pretty applicable maxim, rule followers. Rules and order and structure are the way that autistic people manage their life. And generally speaking, that they are rigid in their rule following, and that includes the rule of law. And a lot of times I'm seeing people run afoul because they just either didn't understand the rule or they didn't understand the social situation that led to the criminal conduct. And so, I do have to stress that. Nobody's saying that autistic people are prone to crime. I think the exact opposite is true. And the other thing is that once they do get in trouble and they do understand the rules, they're not going to violate them again because they want to adhere to the rules. And I stress this all the time because all the experts that I work with, like Dr. Lori Sperry in Colorado, Mark Mahoney, who's the foremost autism lawyer in the world, they track recidivism rates. Who's getting in trouble again after they've gotten in trouble once. And those rates are essentially zero. And people need to understand that. They didn't mean to get into trouble that they got in. And once they did, once they understood the problem, they fixed it.
Yeah.
Once they understood the rule, they followed it. And so let's dig in. I know this is probably not your favorite topic, but you did, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's okay. But I think you told me you're okay with it. I would like you to talk about what happened. How'd you get in trouble?
Okay, so this was when I was 33 years old, which is young adulthood. but still older than a lot of the cases that we see at D3, where I am a secretary for the nonprofit organization. And I
Sorry,
had,
I don't mean to interrupt, but I do
oh,
want
that's
to I just want to say D3 stands for Decriminalizing Developmental Disabilities. It's an amazing organization, and Brian Kelmar is the captain of that ship. I'm connected with them too, and they do incredible, incredible work. And I just want to make sure that people know that they're out there because they're an amazing resource. So anyway, we'll talk more about that. But
Well,
go
thank
ahead.
you for that plug for D3 because I'm part of their board of directors, so I appreciate that. So I had just graduated school and had graduate school was one of the most stressful times in my life because I was in graduate school to be a SYD. And going into the program, I never wanted to get licensure. I had always wanted to just get the graduate degree, the PSYD, and then use that as a way to write for speaking, for advocacy. And ultimately, I wanted to be a professor at a college. I didn't want to use the PSYD to be a therapist and get my 2,000 hours and all that. So I had just graduated from that program, which was highly stressful because the program itself was very interpersonal. There was a lot of group work and a lot of emotional entanglement as far as, doing therapy, one-on-one therapy with other people in the class, like demonstrations and things like that. And that just was not something that I was good at. I did make one really close friend from that program, but aside from that, it was a tough program to get through. I did get the PSYD. I didn't get the licensure purposefully. I had to do a lot of extra stuff that I would have to make up for the 2,000 hours to get the degree. So once I got out of that, I had been, going online throughout the, 4 years of my PSYD program to do a lot of research and some of that online, you know, work that I did because I was online, I also did other things online. And one of the things I did at the time was try to get music. And one of the ways they used to use to get music at the time was through the Napster or things
Hmm.
like that.
Those peer to
And
peer,
peer to
like
peer and
BitTorrent, yeah.
BitTorrent.
Yeah.
And I
Hey, I'm
was
sorry to interrupt. Did you have your diagnosis by this point? I know you said it was like '04, but I don't know where we are in this
Yeah,
deal.
so the thing is, I got my diagnosis right before I entered my grad program, my PSYD program, because I needed to tell the dean of the school that I wasn't there to get a licensure. And the only way that I could have gotten into that program was with that diagnosis because they would have otherwise said, well, this isn't a good fit for you. You need to get the 2,000 hours because our graduates are licensed, period. And I was asking for something different. I was asking for accommodations. So the degree actually kind of came at a good time for me because so I got the degree, the diagnosis in 2004, but what I'm talking about happened in 2010
Okay.
as far as
Yeah.
the arrest.
Well,
Um,
that's another good tip for parents or people that, I've heard this too. I don't want the stigma. Yeah, I could have gotten a diagnosis, but I don't want that stigma for my kid or whatever else. Get the diagnosis because you need that to get the accommodations and to help you be successful in this lifetime. And God forbid you get in trouble, then you get your diagnosis. We see that all the time. We figure it out, and then the prosecution is like, "Well, that's convenient." And all of a sudden, you're autistic. That's not how it works. But get the diagnosis, please. Okay, continue. Sorry.
Yeah, so it started out where I was trying to see, what kind of music is out there. It's not like I had a lot of money where I could just go to the store and get tons of CDs or vinyl records. And it was like, wow, this is cool. And I didn't really even understand that when I was doing this, I was getting it from another person. It just kind of seemed like there was this free musical thing that I could download music and here it is, and I can listen to it. And then it morphed into, other things, which then encompassed downloading, images that obviously I'm very ashamed of having downloaded, having, not really an idea at all that what I was doing was having an impact on anybody. Now, this is one of these instances where I can't believe that I'm saying that because I really should have. And it's like what I talked about earlier when I said how the empathy piece like kicks in and you say to yourself, how could I have been like so effing stupid or so dumb? Like, how could I not know that this is having an impact on somebody else, something I'm doing in my own home? And I'm still trying to figure it out to this day. But the fact is, I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't. And, I got the way it happens for a lot of people, the knock at the door at 6:30 in the morning. And, I had my noisemakers on, so I didn't really hear the knock. And so they busted in. And you've heard the story a million times, Doug, being a criminal defense attorney, the dawn raids. And that's what happened to me.
I've heard a lot of people say, because people on the spectrum are very rigid thinkers and they're online and this stuff is there. And sometimes they say, well, I didn't know it was illegal. Why would it be all over the place online if it were illegal? And it strikes me in back if we rewind in the context of these file sharing things, I'm sure a lot of people said that about music. Like this must be legal. Otherwise, why would they continue to let this Napster or these sites exist?
Yeah,
You know,
I absolutely thought because I started out with music, it was like they'd take this down. Like if this was illegal, they would take this down. They wouldn't let something like this stay up. If I mean, the thought didn't even really cross my mind at all. It was like, here's this music. I'm downloading it, and I don't see anything saying that I can't download it. And like, I didn't have a thought that downloading music was wrong or stealing, or I mean, it's just like it didn't cross my mind. The whole concept of it didn't click in until too late, until after the fact. And it makes me feel dumb to say that because I did have a frickin', PSYD degree at the time. It wasn't like it was just, some high school dropout or,
yeah.
I feel stupid saying this. And yet it's like I have to face it. And I'll have these conversations with my dad where he'll be like, you didn't know. And I'll be like, yeah, but shouldn't I have? I was smart. And he was like, well, yeah, you are smart, but you have autism. And so you have spiky skills. You're really smart in some areas and not so smart in others. And
Yeah.
it's been a really hard process to face because in a way it makes me have to face parts of myself that like, how did I not see this? I know I'm empathetic. I've always tried to be empathetic, and yet in this, moment there was a delayed empathy, and it's a hard thing to have to live with.
Well, I think you touched on the fundamental obstacle that I face as a defense lawyer when I have a client on the autism spectrum, which is this misnomer of the term high functioning. The decision makers in a case, they're rigid thinkers in their own way because they're going to look at someone like you and say, graduated high school, graduated college, PhD, drives a car, has a job, has published article. Don't sit here and tell me they didn't know this or they didn't understand that. You're just using autism as the excuse du jour. And what they cannot understand is how a person can have strong areas here and complete blind spots there. And what would I mean if you, it's it's very hard to explain that to somebody in a way that's A, plain English, and B, resonates with them in a way that's meaningful. Could you give me any advice if I had a prosecutor in the room and I just needed to help them understand why?
Here's the two things I would say. I always give the example of driving a car. Now, I can drive a car, but I cannot for the life of me parallel park. So let's say that parallel parking was a felony. Somehow, if you did it wrong, you're going to, go to prison for 5 or 10 years. A prosecutor would probably say, but you can drive on the expressway, on the freeway. You drive 65, 70 miles an hour. Parallel parking is easy compared to that. Not for me, because when it comes to spatial dimensions and things like that, it is hard and I just can't do it. So if I have to parallel park, I will walk a half mile or whatever I have to do to park where I know I can park so I don't hit a car and walk to my destination. There's uneven development there. Like I can drive a car, but it doesn't mean I can do everything associated with driving. Prosecutors just need to know that autistic people, it's not a linear model of level one, level two, level three. It's more of like a circular pie chart where there are people who, have deficits that are huge in some areas and not so huge in others. I mean, no two people's autism look exactly alike. Even though there are common denominators between everybody, everybody is going to be a little different. And the signature characteristic for me of autism is these spiky skills, these kind of peaks and valleys. And it's kind of a hard concept to grasp because we're so used to saying, well, if somebody is intelligent, that means they can do everything. Or if somebody's not intelligent, that means they are collecting unemployment. But that's not the reality. There are strengths and weaknesses in the same person that look contradictory. I can play tennis, but I can't tie my own tie, or I have trouble tying my shoes. Now, what if I was put on trial for tying my own tie? Would they say, but you can play tennis and you were number one singles and played varsity tennis, but you can't tie your own tie? That's so much easier. It would be like, but they're two different skills. Yes, they both relate to motor coordination, but they're different.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
if they apply that logic to the criminal legal system, which I know is hard for them to do, I think there'd be a lot more compassion. But that's how I look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. If you were my client, I'd say this is also the kid who couldn't open a door in
Right,
elementary
right.
school.
Because I couldn't think that turning it counterclockwise would open
Yeah.
it. Like it
Right.
just didn't occur to me.
Rigid thinking, executive functioning, hyper focus, anxiety, isolate, all these things come into play. And, I hate the term high functioning. I'm sorry. I just think it's such a detrimental term when it comes to my clients. And I hate the term mild. When they say, oh, he has autism, but it's mild. I'm like, there's no such thing as mild. And, Dr. Sperry said, something very profound. I don't know if she got it from one of her clients or patients, but she said, just because you're experiencing my autism is mild doesn't mean I am experiencing my autism mild, because there's a whole internal universe of things happening inside your head.
And the
But
fact
this
that
is a brain. Yeah.
And that autistic people are going to be masking a lot of their behavior throughout the course of the day. So it may look mild to you because they're doing everything to compensate and to, pass as normal, whatever normal means. But
Yeah.
to them, when they get home and they break down and they can't remember, to eat because they, are so taxed, that their executive functioning just falls apart, it's not mild at all. It may look mild to you because of how they present, but you put them in a stressful situation and that mask will come off, right away. So,
Yeah.
uh,
Masking is a huge part of this, and that's why I think in large part we call it the hidden disability. If somebody had outward disability like Down syndrome, they probably never get prosecuted because everyone sees their deficits and assumes that they're less culpable or they didn't know. But for autism, it's hidden, and we go to great lengths to hide that because, well, who doesn't want to fit in and belong and have friends and be a part of this world? So we learn to mask that. We learn what we call scripting, right? Where we start speaking or reacting or smiling in a way that makes sense in the social world. But these are just scripts that we learn. They're not
and
intuitive.
I grew up with a father who was like very socially successful. And so I basically modeled a lot of my behavior after him. Like I just saw how he behaved and how he interacted with family. And it was like, okay, so here's who I'm going to copy. And, when you're around your dad all your time, you start to internalize some of his behavior. And in certain situations, I could pass because I could act like him. But was I really him on the inside? No, not at all.
So tell me more about your journey through the criminal system. What were some of the ways? I mean, obviously, autism is front and center in the putting the conduct in context, but what were some of the other ways? What were some of the things that were missed along the way, either from your own lawyer or from the players in the system? What do you wish would have happened differently?
I can't complain about the legal representation that I received. My dad hired a very good criminal defense attorney who at first said, "Yeah, I don't know that much about autism, but I'm willing to learn." The fact that he said that at the beginning just instilled my dad, not me at the time, because I was too much in a daze. I didn't know what was going on, but instilled my dad with a lot of confidence. And he took my case very seriously. He got me, he got me into two different experts. He had my therapist write a report. Those reports were viewed by the prosecution, and the prosecution said, "We want our own experts to write our own reports." They sent me to the head of the victim assistance program at the FBI. At the time, he was the head. I don't think he's still there, but at the time, he was the head. But supposedly, he also knew a little bit about autism. So that gave my defense attorney some hope. And he saw that as somewhat of an opening. My dad was like, "But he's the head of the victim assistance program. Is he going to be, not fair in his assessment?" And my attorney was like, "Well, we have no case. I mean, we have no choice. This is the only, pathway that they're giving us." So my dad and I flew to Washington, D.C. I had my big, GPS monitor on my ankles. We made the trek and he, interviewed me for like 5, 6 hours, asked me every question I can remember under the sun, my AppGuard score. I mean, just trying to poke and prod into my mind like I've never experienced in my life up till that point. And then as we were leaving, he said to my dad and I, I'll probably be getting a report based on the things that I did today with your son to the U.S. attorney." Well, a couple of months went by and we never heard, my defense attorney wasn't hearing from the prosecution. So he called the prosecution and they said, "We didn't ask for a report." And we were all like, "What?" Well, he said that he wanted to write a report, or that he was going to write a report. Why is he not writing a report? But he told them orally that he didn't have any issues with diversion. That's what we were told by the prosecutor who communicated that to our defense lawyer. And then they wanted me to see another prosecution expert locally in town at a place called the Forensic Center, which is in Ann Arbor. It's, about an hour from where we live. So I saw yet another person who did write a report. And basically it was a friendly report. I mean, it was, not making any definitive recommendations, but it kind of presented the facts accurately. So this all took about 28 months from start to finish to resolve.
Wow.
And what they finally came to, which was, "All right, we're going to allow you to plead guilty. We won't recommend prison, but you are going to have a period of supervised release." So my lawyers did the best they could. They did a really good job given, what they were working with and the fact that they didn't know a lot about autism when they came on board, and being very persistent in trying to get the kind of expert testimony that I needed to move the needle, because without that, who knows what would have happened.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Mm-hmm.
really grateful that I did have the kind of representation that I got. I know everybody doesn't always get that.
Yes. Well, that's true. And a lot of times they don't get the result. And that's probably why, because there are just some areas of the country that are seemingly intractable, but I say never give up hope. You got a pretty good result in the grand scheme of things. That was a federal case too, so I just want lawyers who are listening to this to understand there is a way through this to avoid a custody and other collateral consequences. But yeah, having a qualified expert is the basic, like the first, that's 101. And a lot of lawyers don't understand that. And I always emphasize qualified because there are lots and lots of forensic psychologists who've worked on lots and lots of cases and they're really, really good. But when it comes to autism, they're not the one for you. And I would say we're real busy, so we have these people that we can just call quick and that we've worked with them before and it's easy. Don't do that in an autism case. You need an expert who understands autism backwards and forwards, and those experts are few and far between. You got to work to find. They're out there. There are a bunch, and they're out there, but you got to work to find them. Don't go to your go-to person. So that's a good practice pointer, I would say. What else in terms of things you need a lawyer who is not well versed in autism, which by the way is probably 99% or more of all criminal defense lawyers. And it's not a knock on them. I mean, you don't know what you don't know until you have to know it. If I didn't have a child, if I hadn't been living this journey for 25, 21 years myself, I might not know about any of this stuff. So, what do you need a lawyer to know right off the bat who's getting a case and they have a client on the autism spectrum and they don't know about autism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that type of client is going to be a different kind of client than that they've ever worked with. I know that from my own lawyer, I didn't know the steps of a criminal proceeding. I didn't know, like, first there's an arraignment, and then, at the arraignment there's bond, and then there's, preliminaries. I didn't know any of this, and I was kind of flying blind. And I think a lawyer would need to be patient with somebody on the spectrum to kind of explain the concepts without freaking the person on the spectrum out, as far as, because there's a lot of scary stuff that can happen, and somebody on the spectrum might have trouble processing it or internalizing what may be the consequences. But for me, I think I kept looking for reassurance to my lawyer when he honestly couldn't give me that reassurance. And at the time, I didn't understand why. Hey, I didn't know what I was doing, and help me, and I'm going to do my best. And it was like, well, that's my life is on the line. And I'm sure all clients to some extent are like that. But because I was on the spectrum, I needed a lot of hand holding. And I think that my attorney, understandingly, because it's not your job to be a shrink when you're a lawyer, it's not, he didn't understand some of that. But when it comes to the important stuff, I would say seek out, accommodations whenever you can. For example, they put me initially in a group therapy situation, and it was very traumatizing because I was hearing people who had committed horrible crimes. And this is pre-trial that I was in this group. There were people who were confessing to horrible crimes, and it was like, I really don't have anything in common with these people, and hearing what they're doing is incredibly upsetting. And I thought this was supposed to be therapeutic for me, and yet I'm going home traumatized. So my lawyer actually made a pretrial motion asking that I be placed in individual therapy with a therapist who specialized in autism. So he wasn't trying to get me relieved of the requirement to be in therapy. He was trying to get me an accommodation.
Yeah,
And
appropriate therapy.
and it
Which,
and
by the way, should be what everybody wants because the point of therapy is to get better, not worse. So make those motions. A lot of lawyers are afraid to do that too, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's okay. My lawyer did make the motion, and it was granted. So I was able to, I think, do better mentally throughout the 28 months because I was with a therapist who understood autism. And had I been placed in this group setting for 28 months, hearing about, well, I've got to surrender tomorrow and I'm going to be going to, Butner or whatever, like, and I did this and I did that, because what they'll tell you in these groups is the more you talk about your story, the better a recommendation will give to the pretrial service officer, who will then talk to the probation officer, and that'll go in your pre-sentencing report. So there's a lot of kind of manipulation.
Yeah.
And I was telling my dad this, and my dad, who is an attorney, was like saying, this is wrong. It's one thing if this were after you've been convicted, but this shouldn't be happening before before a trial. That
Hmm.
you've still got your Fifth Amendment right. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think the type of therapy that I had was much more supportive, and ultimately a better fit for me.
Good. This idea about sort of explaining, hand holding is what you said. And, it probably goes without saying, but a lot of lawyers are not good at that either. And we're taught to not get completely emotionally invested in a case. and hand holding is anathema to what we do. And it's got to be, I believe it's important in every case, but it's so important in this case because what you're talking about, especially when it comes to really digging in, explaining the process, what comes next, what is this hearing gonna, what's gonna happen? I mean, when my son, has to do something, he needs a day or a week's notice and put it on the calendar and be able to prepare mentally, even if it's going to a dentist appointment, whatever it is, right? And they need this predictability and this structure and to understand this. And what we didn't talk about much today is this concept of meltdowns.
Yes,
And
yes.
meltdowns can be large and small, but when there is an unpredictable, high stress, high anxiety, which is every criminal case ever in the history of the universe, right? And then you're in unfamiliar settings, you don't know what's happening, you don't know what's coming next, you're in this overload. And then what happens? How are you able to function or not when you're having these in these high stress moments, right?
Yeah,
Pretty
and it,
debilitating, right?
absolutely. And I had, so many meltdowns. I was close to suicide, quite honestly. I mean, that's probably true for a lot of defendants in that situation. I don't think that's an autism specific characteristic, but, I'll just give some examples. Let's say that there was a hearing that was supposed to happen, March 24th, and it got postponed. Well, in my mind, it was like, wait a minute. March 24th. I've been preparing for this emotionally, psychologically, in every possible way. And now you're telling me that it's not going to happen and it's going to go till April. So then April 31st comes along and the new hearing, and that's postponed. Wait a minute. And so there'd be this rage like, Dad, you've got to tell my attorney I can't take this anymore. Just when I think that something is happening and we're going to have some headway. And my dad had to explain to me, sometimes delay is a good thing. What? Delay? No, but in this situation, it can be a good thing. And I was like, I don't understand that. I didn't understand it. And he was like, you just have to. So month after month, there'd be delay after delay after delay, and I'd be getting emotionally ready. And pretty soon I just had to accept, okay, there's probably not going to be a hearing this month. And just when I thought there wasn't going to be a hearing because it'd be delayed again, there would be a hearing. And that would be a surprise, like, oh, but I thought it was going to be delayed.
Mm.
So, there were so many unpredictable. I mean, the criminal legal system is by its definition unpredictable. Everything
Yeah.
about it is unpredictable. There's nothing that you think is going to happen that actually happens. And for someone like me who has to know everything that I'm doing at every hour of the day, like 2 weeks in advance, you know, that level of detail is very important to me. And the fact of what could happen to me as far as where I end up with my daily life being thrown off, it was enough to almost send me off the cliff. And I do attribute a lot of that to the autism.
One little thing they talked about that a lawyer can do, and I never thought of it, and it's pretty simple, is take your client to the courtroom before, a day before, a week before, when there's nobody there and it's quiet, and just have them in that environment to see it and explain to them, the judge is going to be there, the PO is going to sit there, this is our table, this is what the prosecutor's probably going to say, and this is our turn to speak, and just give them a sense. Do you think that would have been? Do you think that's good advice?
Yeah, I think so. I
Yeah.
think that when I went to the federal judge, not the magistrate, I hadn't been in that courtroom before until I was there to allocute.
Yeah.
And those courtrooms are grand and magisterial, but
Mm.
they're really intimidating as hell.
Yeah.
You know that being somebody who does most of your work in federal court. And it just was a setting that was kind of overwhelming. And not that it would have made it that much easier, but I think seeing it and just like being prepared for it would have
Hmm.
helped a little bit.
And I've been, if it's the same court, I'm thinking I've been in that court. Well, I've been in the courthouse, and they've got one particular courtroom we got a tour of, and it was amazing. It was just, but it was massive. It was
Yeah.
cavernous with all the pictures on the wall. And the other thing is for lawyers, we need to constantly be telling the story of autism in a case like this. And if you're going to have to go to court, you may have to file a motion or ask the judge or something to say, I would like to come, on my own early. And not only is that good for your client, but it's just another small opportunity to tell the story of autism to the decision makers so they understand what's happening. Why would you need to do that? And because this is how my client's mind functions,
Yeah.
because this is a developmental disability and these are the accommodations that we need to make. And that's
And Doug,
important.
if I could interject,
Yeah.
one thing that I found a lot of resistance towards was whenever my dad wanted to be there to help me to act as a kind of person to give me support, be my support person. If he came down with me to the pretrial service office, he would be kicked out because no, you're not a party to this. Well, I
Yeah.
am his parent. Well, is he over 21? Yeah. Well, then you're
Yeah.
not a party to this. When I was there for the group intake for the therapy, my dad wanted to meet the therapist and to come in with me for the individual intake interview. And the guy said no. And my dad said, well, I really would like to be there. He has a disability, he has autism, and I should be there to be his support person. And he said, and I'll never forget this, sir, if you don't go back into the lobby right now, I'm going to call his pretrial service officer and tell him that he's being non-cooperative, and then he will have his bond revoked. So that's your choice. So, I mean, my dad didn't have any choice. He had to go back to the lobby. But there was
Wow.
this overall resentment between the pretrial services officer and this therapist of like they wanted to keep my dad out of the process as much as possible. I don't know why. Maybe they felt like he was trying to be manipulative, but it was him wanting to be there to support me as he had all my life for every situation that I've ever been in. I mean, I was just always used to having my dad be a support person. To me, this was no different.
Hmm.
And they resisted it and were kind of nasty about it.
Wow. Wow. Well, let's do some hopeful things now because you navigated through this horrible chapter of the book of your life, and you went on to write a lot of new chapters and a lot of new books and a lot of speaking and a lot of advocacy. So I want you to just talk about how you turned this collision with the criminal system into really your superpower. Like what are you doing? What are you doing in the world?
Well, after my conviction, I just wanted to put a pen to paper of my experience. I didn't have any illusion that, my experience would be any other person's experience. I just wanted to write. And in doing so, I just reached out to my publisher because I had written previous books about bullying and anxiety and depression. And I said, is this something, that you'd be interested in? Obviously, this isn't everybody's story. This is just my story. And they said, at this time, I don't know if it would be wise for you to write alone, but let's see if anybody would be interested. So they reached out to Tony Atwood and Isabel, who is a sexologist at the University of Montreal. And they were happy to contribute a chapter because they each were familiar with this subject. And so the book went into print. And then my dad, who's a law professor, started receiving a bunch of calls from parents nationwide who had read the book because he had written a chapter for the book. And
Mhm.
they looked up his University of Detroit Mercy Law email address and they were like, my son's going through the same thing. And what do I do? And so he would get dozens and dozens and I think over 150 calls. And that's when we knew that like, oh my God, like I'm not the only one. This is pretty common. That was my education into all of this. Like I learned that okay, this is not unique to me and not a me issue, that this is, and again, when I say this, it's not like I'm saying autistic people are more likely to commit crimes or more likely to commit a certain type of crime, but that there is this vulnerability that I just didn't know extended beyond me. And on the one hand, it made me feel relieved that I wasn't the only one, but on the other hand, it made me feel really sad that like all these other people were going through maybe even worse situations than what I went through myself. And then, after that, I expanded my writing, and
I'm sorry. That book you're talking about is called The Autism Spectrum, Sexuality and the Law, correct?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay, and I assume Amazon we can get that where book still out there on
Yep.
Amazon?
That's
Yeah,
still available on Amazon. And
good.
then I wrote a kind of a more academic book after that where I put together research that I had done on my own about autism in the criminal legal system. And it was at this point that my dad met Brian Kelmar, who is, the president and executive director of D3.
Yeah.
And I started, getting involved with them. And I've, been very fortunate to be on their board. And being on their board, I've been able to, see how other parents have dealt with this. And it's so tragic learning about what their children are going through, how many of them are in solitary confinement because of the fact that they can't be in general population because of their disability or because of their charges and what's happening to them. They're not getting the medical treatment they need. They're not getting the, physical, the psychological treatment they need. They're just languishing. And it makes me so sad because there's nothing I can immediately do about it. But I am happy that, I'm part of this organization that works to change the law. And the fact that, these laws have been enacted in Virginia
Yep.
is so groundbreaking. And, part of D3's mission is to, spread this, to as many parts of the country as possible. And
Yeah.
I'm fortunate to be a part of that process.
It's amazing work that they're doing and that you're doing on the board there. And just so people know, one of the laws they got passed with unanimous bipartisan support in Virginia, which that's not a blue haven. There's some small blue part, but point is they got a law that says if you can show that your autism played, a significant, I'm paraphrasing, but substantive role in your offense conduct, then you can qualify for diversion, which is huge. They also got some changes in the IEPs or the academic and the plans to say there needs to be autism specific sex education for children, which is so important, teaching them the rules so they don't run afoul of the rules at an earliest of ages. We need, I mean, every state in the union and certainly the feds need to learn from that. And my hope is that continues to grow. But the thing that you're talking about, when your book came out and you started getting all these responses, you realize you're not alone in this world. And that's one of the things I love about D3. I encourage anybody listening to this to go visit the website. It's D3, but it's spelled DTHREE.org. And check that out. And you can reach out to them if you want to join the support group. Also, for any professionals that are listening to this podcast, because I know there are some, if you are doing work in the autism space and you're not already aligned with D3, you need to be, because they do the same thing in that context where professionals can get together and discuss best practices and things like that. And it's a support group of a different kind, but one of the most important kind, because we're trying to educate people and enhance their skills, their knowledge, their credibility. So D3 is doing incredible work on every level. So what else do we want to talk about? I want to know, I know you're doing speaking, advocacy, other things. What do folks need to know about what you're doing and where they can find you?
Um,
There's so many other books that you've written, and I assume we can get them all on Amazon. I have some on my shelf as well. I always like to give the person in the hot seat the last word. Was there anything that you really wanted to talk about or want anyone to know about any of this before we finish up?
The thing that I hear that comes up over and over again in the group is that a defense attorney that a person has doesn't want to reach out to a person like Mark Mahoney or you because they feel like they know enough. And I just want to say if there's a parent listening to this podcast and your attorney is taking that posture, to just try to push back on them as much as possible, that this isn't something that is a criticism of your attorney, like they're not doing enough. It's just like you wouldn't ask a gastroenterologist to do heart surgery. We all specialize in different things. And, a person who needs an autism specialist when they're going through this situation shouldn't be denied one because their attorney, thinks that what they're doing is enough. And I know there are a lot of attorneys that listen to your show. And I would say to the defense attorneys, if a parent says that, or even if you suspect that your client is on the spectrum, take the lead and reach out to, an autism specialist who is like you, Doug, or Mark Mahoney, or one of these, expert witnesses who, can, turn your child's story into something understandable for the court. That's why I got the result that I got, because my lawyer was, wise enough to say, I don't know that much about autism and I need to learn,
Yeah.
and really helped me.
Well, thank you for saying that. Nick, you are living proof that there is hope. You not only weathered the storm of the criminal system, but you really triumphed over it and turned this into something beautiful, and that you're a warrior and that you're a fierce advocate for actual justice in this space. So, I'm hoping that I actually can put justice back in the criminal justice system after talking to you, because there it is possible, and you are the living embodiment of that. So, well, this has been a long time coming, our talk together, and I hope it's the first of many, and not just on the podcast, but we have a lot of work to do in this lifetime, and I'm at your service.
Well,
So
thank you. Yes. No,
thank you for doing this.
thank you, and I look forward to working with you, hopefully many times in the future.
That's it for today, but before we go, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to you, the listener, for spending time with us today getting set for sentencing. Whether you're a lawyer, someone who could use the help, or maybe you're just a true crime buff who loves the inside scoop on how this whole thing works. If you're interested in knowing more about what I do, mitigation videos, case consults, live teaching, on-demand educational content, books, articles, all of it, please visit www.dougpassonlaw.com. I'm Doug Passon. Until next time, hang in there. Wait a minute, that's a stupid way to sign off on a podcast about sentencing. Hang in there. What's the matter with you, man? I guess they call that gallows humor. Sorry. All right. Well, I will see you next time on Set for Sentencing. Bye-bye.